Evan Cole had lived alone on his ranch for so many years that silence had become normal for him. He woke up every morning before sunrise, fed the horses, checked the fences, and worked until evening without hearing another human voice. People in town knew him as the quiet rancher who kept to himself, polite but distant, a man whose life revolved around land, cattle, and long, empty nights. He was not unhappy, but he was lonely in a way he never talked about. His parents had passed years ago, and friendships faded as work swallowed all his time. He was a man who had grown used to eating meals alone and speaking only to animals. When his aunt suggested an arranged marriage through an old family connection, he almost refused. It felt strange and old-fashioned, but at the same time, something inside him hoped for change. He did not expect love. He only hoped for someone who would not leave, someone who might share the quiet world he lived in. After weeks of thinking, he finally agreed. The woman arriving was named Mara. Evan knew almost nothing about her, except that she came from a remote mountain community and that she wanted a peaceful home away from crowded settlements. His aunt mentioned she was a tall one, but Evan had no idea what that meant until the day she stepped off the dusty wagon that brought her to his ranch. Evan stood on the porch, hands shaking slightly as the wagon approached. The horses slowed, and the driver nodded at him before stepping aside. Then Mara climbed down, and Evan almost forgot how to breathe. She was tall, much taller than any woman he had ever seen. Her shoulders were broad, her posture strong, and she carried a simple bag with one hand as if it weighed nothing. Her long brown hair was braided neatly, and her eyes held a quiet, nervous brightness, like someone trying hard to be brave in an unfamiliar place. For a moment, Evan wondered if she would think he looked too small or too ordinary next to her. He was not short, but beside her he felt like a boy again, unsure and shy. He tipped his hat out of habit. "Mara?" he asked softly. She nodded. "You must be Evan." Her voice surprised him. Despite her strong appearance, her voice was gentle, almost soft enough to disappear in the wind. He felt a small, unexpected warmth in his chest. "Welcome," he said. "I cleaned the guest room. I wasn't sure what you'd prefer. You can choose whichever room you like." She smiled politely. The kind of smile someone gives when they're overwhelmed but trying to be respectful. "Thank you. The travel was long. I'm grateful to be here." They walked to the house together, and Evan noticed she moved carefully, almost too carefully, as if afraid of taking up space. He understood that feeling more than she knew. Inside the house, things were quiet. Evan had always kept it clean, but it felt different with another person stepping inside. He suddenly saw every detail: the plain wooden furniture, the simple curtains, the small number of personal things. He wondered if she expected something grand or impressive, and anxiety tightened in his stomach. "This is your home now, too," he said, hoping his voice sounded steady. She nodded and looked around slowly. "It's peaceful here." That one sentence eased him. Peaceful, that was something he could offer. He showed her the rooms, the kitchen, and the porch. She listened politely, but he could sense the nervous energy under her calm exterior. It reminded him of a horse on its first day in a new barn, alert, unsure, waiting to see what kind of person she had been given to. Evan cooked a simple dinner. He wasn't a great cook, but Mara ate quietly and thanked him more than once. They talked in small pieces: where she grew up, what the mountains were like, what his ranch life was like. The conversation was awkward but honest. Neither of them was good with words, but both tried. That night, after she went to her room, Evan stayed awake longer than usual. He sat by the window and watched the sky, wondering if she felt safe, if she regretted coming, if he had already failed at making her comfortable. He worried he had spoken too little or too much, or simply the wrong way. He knew she was strong and capable, but he sensed the quiet fear in her eyes, the fear of being unwanted or judged. The next morning, Mara woke early and joined him outside just as he was feeding the horses. She wore a long, simple dress and had her hair tied back again. Seeing her in the early light, tall and firm in posture, he realized she didn't look like someone who belonged to a quiet ranch life. Yet she stood there with determination. "I want to help," she said. "You don't have to," Evan replied quickly. "You're still settling in." "I want to," she repeated, and there was something steady in her tone. So he let her. And within minutes, he realized she was stronger than he ever imagined. When he struggled with a stubborn fence post, she lifted the beam as if it were light. When a horse shied away from a loose wire, she moved calmly and handled the situation with surprising gentleness. He watched her with amazement, not because she was physically strong, but because she didn't show off, didn't brag, didn't try to impress him. She simply worked, she listened, she helped. People in her old community might have teased her for being giant, but out here her strength fit perfectly into ranch life. By noon, clouds were gathering. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up. Evan knew a storm was coming. "We should head back," he said. "That fence can wait for tomorrow." Mara nodded, but before they could reach the house, the rain started, first light, then heavy. They hurried, but the storm drenched them. By the time they reached the porch, Mara's dress was soaked through, clinging to her arms as she shivered from the cold. Evan panicked immediately. He had seen men fall sick fast after working in cold rain. He didn't want her first days on the ranch to be marked by illness. "You're freezing," he said, stepping back to let her inside. "You need to get out of those wet clothes." Then the words flew out before he could think. "Take off your clothes now." As soon as he heard himself, his eyes widened. The sentence sounded nothing like what he meant. Heat rushed to his face. He opened his mouth to correct it, but Mara had already gone still. Her eyes widened slightly, and she didn't speak. She looked more confused than scared, but she clearly misunderstood. Evan held up both hands. I mean your wet clothes. They're soaked. You could catch a terrible cold." "I meant, just change into dry things quickly, please." But she didn't respond. Instead, she gently set her bag aside and reached for the tie of her dress, misunderstanding his frantic tone as a command she was expected to follow. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was doing what she thought was required of her, but Evan felt his heart stop. He turned around so fast he almost tripped. His face burned red. "No, no, wait! I didn't mean it like that," he said, staring at the wall to give her privacy. "Please, Mara, don't misunderstand. I'm just worried you'll get sick." Behind him, he heard her breath catch, then a soft, embarrassed laugh. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. It was a gentle, shy sound. The sound of someone finally realizing the situation was a huge misunderstanding. "I understand," she said quietly. "You were worried." Evan grabbed a thick blanket from the chair without turning around and held it out behind him until she took it. "I'm sorry," he said again. "It's all right," she answered softly. "Really?" For the first time since she arrived, her voice sounded a little warm. Not forced, not polite, but warm. Something fragile but hopeful rested in her words. That one small moment, awkward, confusing, but honest, broke the wall between them more than any polite conversation could have. Later that evening, after she changed and warmed herself, they sat by the fireplace drinking hot tea. The storm rumbled outside, but inside the house, something felt different. Not comfortable yet, but closer, more real. Mara glanced at him, her cheeks slightly pink from the earlier incident. "You care a lot," she said. "Even if you say things fast." He covered his face with his hand in embarrassment. "I'm not good with words." I noticed, she said gently. They shared the smallest, softest smile, two quiet people learning each other for the very first time, and that was how their story truly began. The storm had not yet begun when Mara and Evan reached the far side of the ranch that afternoon, but the wind was growing stronger with each hour. The sky darkened slowly, the air felt heavy, and the horses kept tossing their heads uneasily. Evan sensed trouble in the weather. He had lived on the land long enough to know when nature was preparing something fierce. They had been working since early morning, checking fences, clearing fallen branches from the last small storm, and making sure the animals were safe. Mara had worked beside him without complaint, lifting heavy planks, pulling stubborn posts out of the dirt, and even calming a panicked horse that had gotten tangled in brush. Evan kept glancing at her as they worked, quietly impressed by how she handled everything with patient strength. He wasn't used to working with another person, but having her there felt steady. By noon, the clouds thickened into a gray blanket. Evan wiped sweat from his forehead and said, "We should head back soon. You can feel the rain coming." Mara nodded. "Yes, the wind is cold." They began to walk toward the house, but halfway across the field, one of the fence lines snapped with a loud crack. A long wooden beam tilted dangerously, threatening to collapse onto the path where the horses often walked. "We need to fix that," Evan said immediately. Mara didn't argue. Together they hurried toward the broken section. The wind made the job harder, constantly pushing against them. The rope they used kept slipping, the beam kept wobbling, and they had to work quickly. Mara held the beam in place while Evan tightened the knots. Her fingers were cold, her dress whipped around her legs, and her hair snapped in the wind like a loose banner. "Hold it just a little longer," Evan said, his voice raised over the wind. "I can," she replied firmly, but the wind grew stronger, making both of them unsteady. Evan's hat nearly flew off, and he had to grab it and tuck it into his jacket. A moment later, rain began to fall, just a few drops at first, but sharp, cold, and growing quickly. "Almost done," Evan said. Mara kept holding, even though the beam pressed hard against her shoulder. She didn't complain, didn't ask for help. When Evan finally tied the last knot and stepped back to check it, he looked at her with admiration. "That was good work," he said. "You too," she replied with a small, breathless smile. But the rain didn't give them time to enjoy the moment. It suddenly poured down, heavy, icy sheets that felt like they could cut skin. Evan grabbed the tools, and Mara held on to the rope so it wouldn't get lost in the wind. Together, they rushed across the field toward the house. By the time they reached the porch, both were soaked completely. Clothes clinging to their skin, hair dripping, hands shaking from the sudden cold. Mara's lips trembled slightly as she tried to brush water from her face. Evan was shocked by how fast the temperature had dropped. He pushed the door open and motioned for her to step inside. "Quick, get in," he urged, shutting the door behind them to block the wind. The sound of rain pounding on the roof echoed through the house. Evan turned to Mara and felt a jolt of worry shoot through him. Her dress was drenched, droplets falling from the ends of her hair, and she was shivering hard. The sudden cold of the storm was dangerous, especially when someone was wet from head to toe. "You're freezing," he said. "You need to get out of those wet clothes immediately." But his voice rose too quickly, too urgently, and without thinking, the wrong words spilled out in panic. "Take off your clothes now." As soon as he heard himself, Evan felt his entire body stiffen. The sentence sounded sharp and commanding, nothing like what he had intended. He had only meant she needed to change into something dry before she fell sick, but the words came out in the worst possible way. Mara froze completely. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She wasn't scared. She was confused, unsure of what he meant. But she had lived a life where following instructions quietly felt safer than asking questions. So, almost automatically, she set her bag down and reached for the tie of her dress. Evan panicked. "No! No, wait!" he shouted, spinning around so fast he nearly slipped on the wet floor. He held both hands up, facing away from her. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant the wet clothes. You're soaked. You could get sick." Behind him, Mara's hands paused. She didn't keep undressing. She didn't move at all for a moment. The confusion slowly faded from her expression as she realized what had happened. Evan kept speaking, his voice full of pure panic. "Just, please, get a blanket, change into something dry. Not here, not like that. I would never, I just—" The more he tried to explain, the more tangled his words became. His face burned with embarrassment, his ears felt hot, and he wished he could disappear into the wall. Then he heard something unexpected. A soft sound, a small, gentle laugh. Mara covered her mouth, trying not to laugh openly, but she couldn't help it. It wasn't loud or mocking. It was warm, almost sweet, the laugh of someone who suddenly realized the entire situation was an enormous misunderstanding. "I understand," she said softly. Evan slowly turned halfway, still looking at the floor just in case she was changing. "You do?" "Yes," she replied with a small smile in her voice. "You were worried." He let out a long breath he didn't know he had been holding. "I'm so sorry. That came out all wrong." "It's all right," she said. "I know you weren't trying to scare me." He dared to look up, just enough to see her wrapped in the blanket he had given her earlier. Her hair was still wet, her cheeks pink from the cold, but her eyes held warmth now, something gentle that hadn't been there earlier. Mara walked toward the small stove to warm herself. Evan followed, carefully keeping his eyes on her face so she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. He handed her a towel, and she thanked him quietly. While she dried her hair, he heated water for tea. The atmosphere felt different now, not distant, not stiff, but surprisingly soft. The misunderstanding, though embarrassing, had broken the wall of formality between them. Before this moment, they had been strangers trying to be polite. Now, they were two people who had accidentally collided in the most awkward way possible, and instead of making things worse, it had brought them closer. As she warmed her hands over the stove, Mara looked up at Evan. "I didn't mean to misunderstand." "No," he said quickly. "It was my fault. I should have been clearer. I get nervous. I say things too fast. Sometimes the wrong words come out." "I noticed," she said gently. His face turned red again. "I'm really sorry." "You cared," she replied, "and that's what I remember." Her words landed softly like a warm blanket on a cold day. Evan felt something shift in his chest, something he didn't have a name for yet, but something that made his heart beat faster. They sat near the fireplace with their tea, listening to the storm rage outside. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them with warmth. At one point, Evan reached out to stir the fire, and their hands brushed by accident. Both pulled back immediately, shy and nervous. But this time, they both smiled a little. They talked slowly, asking questions they hadn't dared to ask before. Mara told him a little about her mountain home, the quiet nights, the long winters, the way people whispered about her size even when they didn't mean harm. Evan told her about the ranch, how he inherited it young, how silence became his companion, and how he always worried he wouldn't be good enough for anyone. Mara listened carefully. Evan spoke softly. And something inside both of them began to unwind, to relax, to breathe. The storm roared on, but in that small house, warmth finally began to grow. The awkward moment that should have pushed them apart instead pushed them gently toward each other, a small misunderstanding that opened the door to understanding. By the end of the evening, when Mara finally stood to go to her room, she paused at the doorway. "Evan," she said quietly. "Yes?" "Thank you for caring so much." He swallowed, feeling his chest tighten in a way that wasn't painful, just full. "I always will," he said softly. Mara's smile lingered long after she closed her door. And that night, Evan realized something important. Sometimes life doesn't open hearts with perfect words. Sometimes it happens through clumsy moments, warm misunderstandings, and kindness that slips through when people least expect it. And for the first time in years, he went to bed with a hopeful feeling growing quietly inside him. Mara woke early the next morning, long before the sun had climbed over the hills. The storm had passed, leaving the land fresh and cool. A faint mist rested over the ground, and the sky carried soft pink and blue colors. She stepped quietly into the kitchen, thinking Evan would already be outside, but she found him standing there, trying to make breakfast while looking half asleep. He nearly dropped the pan when he saw her. "Oh, good morning," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No," she replied with a small smile. "I'm used to rising early." There was still a bit of shyness between them after the misunderstanding, but something had changed. They were more aware of each other now, not in a tense way, but in a gentle, uncertain way, like two people who shared a secret moment they couldn't forget. The memory of the previous night still sat quietly between them, turning into something that softened the space rather than tightening it. Evan handed her a cup of warm tea. She thanked him, and they stood there for a moment, quietly drinking, listening to the morning settle around them. After breakfast, they went outside to check the damage from the storm. Fallen branches scattered the ground, and puddles dotted the dirt paths. The barn roof had lost a few shingles, and the wind had knocked loose some boards on the west side. "It'll take a few days to fix everything," Evan said. "We can start today," Mara replied. He looked at her carefully. "Only if you want to." "You've been working so hard already." She shook her head. "Work helps me feel at home." So, they began. All morning they cleared branches, fixed fence lines, and gathered tools for later repairs. Evan kept glancing at Mara, amazed at how she handled tasks that most people struggled with. She carried heavy boards without hesitation. She lifted fallen beams with steady hands. She worked with quiet confidence, not trying to impress anyone, just doing her best. But what impressed him even more was how gentle she was. Every time a frightened horse whinnied at the storm damage, she talked softly to it until it calmed down. When a small calf slipped in the mud, she lifted it with surprising care and wiped its nose with her sleeve. Evan had never seen strength and gentleness in such balance before. At the same time, Mara watched him as well. She saw how thoughtful he was, how he took time to make sure she wasn't overworking herself, how he always explained tasks clearly without raising his voice. He never talked down to her, never acted like she didn't understand. He treated her as an equal partner in the work. They barely knew each other, but little things were beginning to feel familiar. His quiet nods, her steady steps, the rhythm of two people finding a place beside each other. Around midday, they took a break by the barn. The sun was warm now, drying the fields. Evan sat on a wooden crate, wiping sweat from his forehead. Mara sat on an overturned bucket nearby, sipping water. She noticed him looking at her with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked gently. He hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "I wanted to ask something, only if you want to share." She waited patiently. "Back there," he said slowly. "When you arrived, you seemed nervous. I don't mean to pry, but were you not treated well before coming here?" Mara looked down at her hands. For a moment, she didn't speak. She wasn't sure how much to tell him, but something in his voice, in his quiet patience, made it easier to open up. "People in my old community were different," she said softly. "They were good people mostly, but they always looked at me like I didn't belong. I was too tall, too strong, too different. Sometimes they made jokes. Sometimes they stared. And sometimes, she paused. Sometimes they acted like I could not be gentle or soft just because I looked different. Evan listened carefully, his expression full of understanding. So I always felt out of place, Mara continued. I came here hoping for somewhere peaceful, somewhere I could start again. Evan leaned forward slightly. You don't have to pretend to be smaller here. Her eyes lifted to meet his. I don't think you're strange, he said quietly. Or too much. I think you're exactly the kind of person a ranch needs. The words surprised her. Not because they were dramatic, they weren't, but because they were honest. She had not heard such simple acceptance in a long time. A soft warmth settled in her chest. And you? She asked. Why did you live alone for so long? Evan exhaled slowly, looking toward the fields. I'm not good with people. Never have been. Talking is hard. Crowds make me nervous. Even in town, I feel like I'm out of place. I'm not interesting. I don't stand out. So I stayed here, thinking maybe this was enough. It wasn't, she asked gently. He shook his head. The land is quiet, but quiet can turn heavy when there's no one to share it with. Mara understood that more deeply than he expected. The conversation lingered in the air, quiet but meaningful. It was the first time they had spoken openly, and it felt like a doorway had finally opened between them. Later in the afternoon, they returned to repairing the barn. Evan climbed a ladder to fix the broken shingles. Mara stayed below, handing him tools as he asked for them. Sometimes he stumbled over his words, but she didn't laugh or tease him. She simply waited, letting him speak in his slow, careful way. He appreciated that more than he could express. When they finished the roof repair, they moved to the loose boards on the west wall. One board was stuck, wedged too tightly. Evan tugged at it with effort, but it didn't budge. Let me try, Mara said. He stepped back to give her room. She gripped the board, pulled with steady force, and the board came free in seconds. Evan blinked, impressed. How did you do that so easily? She shrugged lightly. Just practice. Then, unexpectedly, they both laughed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, natural, and strangely comforting. The kind of laugh that only happens when two people begin to feel safe with each other. By evening, the sky was orange, and the land glowed under the last light of the day. They walked back to the house side by side, not holding hands, not touching, but closer than before. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was peaceful. Inside, Mara helped chop vegetables for dinner. Evan cooked. He wasn't usually confident in the kitchen, but he tried harder because she was watching. She noticed that he concentrated intensely on simple tasks, worried about making mistakes. She found it quietly endearing. You don't have to be perfect, she said softly. He glanced at her. I'm not perfect. Neither am I, she replied. That simple exchange warmed the space between them. After dinner, they sat near the fireplace again. The firelight flickered across the room. The atmosphere was calm, but something delicate rested in the air, something like trust starting to grow. Mara looked at him with a small smile. I'm glad I came here. Evan felt his breath catch for a moment. I'm glad you came too. Their eyes held for a few seconds longer than before. No awkwardness, no fear, just quiet understanding. The misunderstanding from the storm had strangely become a turning point. It had forced them to face their own uncertainties, their own fears, and it had opened a space for honesty neither of them expected. Later, when they said goodnight, they didn't feel like strangers anymore. They felt like two people learning each other's hearts slowly, carefully, one quiet day at a time. And as Mara closed her door, she touched the frame gently, thinking, this house doesn't feel strange anymore. In the hallway, Evan paused before going to his room. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Two lonely lives had begun to find warmth again, not in big gestures, but in simple kindness, shared work, and soft words spoken at the right time. It was slow, it was gentle, but it was real. The storm had left the land soft and quiet for several days. The air smelled clean, the grass looked greener, and the animals seemed calmer than usual. Evan and Mara continued their daily work together, growing more comfortable with each passing sunrise. Their steps began to match each other. Their routines started blending naturally, and the silences between them turned warm instead of awkward. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, they walked out to check the barn repairs. Evan carried a toolbox, and Mara carried a piece of rope over her shoulder. The early light made everything look golden, and for a moment, Evan simply watched her walking ahead, her tall silhouette steady, her long steps confident. He still couldn't believe she was here, living with him, helping him, sharing his days. Mara stopped and looked back. "You're thinking about something," she said softly. "Just checking if the land needs anything." He lied gently. She didn't call him out on it, but she smiled slightly, as if she knew the truth. She had started to understand the little things about him, the way he avoided emotional questions, the way he froze when he felt shy, the way he cared deeply without knowing how to say it. Inside the barn, they inspected the roof and walls. Everything seemed stable. Evan reached up to test one of the beams and accidentally bumped his hand on a nail. He hissed and pulled back. Without thinking, Mara stepped closer. "Let me see." "It's fine," he muttered, embarrassed. "You're bleeding," she said gently. She took his hand carefully, turning it palm up. Her touch was surprisingly delicate for someone so strong. She tore a small strip from her old work cloth and wrapped it around his hand with slow, careful movements. "You didn't have to do that," Evan said quietly. "I wanted to," she replied. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Something warm, steady, and comforting passed between them before they both stepped back, pretending to focus on work again. The day continued normally, fixing tools, checking the cattle, preparing feed for the horses, but little things kept happening. Their shoulders brushed as they walked through a narrow path. They shared the same cup of water without thinking. They laughed together when a young calf tried to chase its own tail. Every small moment drew them a little closer without either of them trying. In the afternoon, they sat by the corral watching the horses run. The sky was clear, the wind soft, the world quiet. Mara leaned on the fence, and Evan stood beside her, glancing at her from time to time. She looked peaceful here, more peaceful than she had looked on the day she arrived. "I never thought I'd feel calm like this," she said softly, watching the horses. "You deserve calm," Evan replied. "You work hard. You're gentle with every creature on this ranch." Her eyes softened. "People back home didn't think I was gentle." "Well," Evan said with a shy smile, "they were wrong." She looked at him, and her expression carried gratitude so deep he could feel it from where he stood. A sudden loud crack of thunder in the distance made the horses jump. Mara turned quickly, sensing danger. The sky hadn't looked stormy a moment ago, but weather changed fast in the region. Evan checked the darkening clouds and sighed. "We should check the barn again," he said. "If another storm is coming, we need to be prepared." Together they hurried back, securing loose items, closing windows, and checking the doors. The wind picked up, and the clouds rolled overhead like dark waves. By the time they stepped outside again, the wind was almost howling. A sudden snap echoed through the air. One of the larger beams on the side of the barn, weakened from the previous storm, cracked and started to fall. Evan didn't see it in time. Mara did. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, grabbed Evan by the back of his shirt, and pulled him out of the way. The beam crashed onto the ground exactly where he had been standing. They both froze, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. "You," Evan began, his voice shaky. "You saved me?" Mara looked at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly from the effort. "You would have done the same." He stepped back to examine the beam. It was huge, heavy, easily capable of causing serious injury. The realization hit him hard. He turned to her slowly. "You could have been hurt." "I wasn't," she replied simply. "But you could have been," he insisted. Mara met his eyes steadily. "You matter to me, Evan." The words struck him like a strong wind, unexpected and impossible to ignore. His breath caught. He didn't know what to say, not right away. He felt the weight of her sincerity, her honesty, her quiet courage. He took a slow step closer to her. "You matter to me, too." It was the first time he had said it aloud, the first time he had admitted it not just to her, but to himself. Rain started to fall, soft at first, then heavier. They hurried inside the house, closing the door behind them. The storm outside was loud, but inside the kitchen, only the warmth of the small oil lamp lit the room. Mara's hair was wet from the first drops of rain, and she pushed it back from her face. Evan handed her a towel, and she dried her hair quietly, thinking about his words. He stood across from her, looking nervous, unsure, but also determined. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally spoke. "I've been quiet most of my life," he said. "I don't know how to say big things the right way. I don't always understand how to speak what's in my heart." She listened, patient and attentive. "But these weeks with you," he continued, "they've felt like I'm finally waking up after a long silence. You work beside me, talk with me, sit with me. You don't make fun of my quiet ways. You're strong, kind, and gentle in your own way. I'm not good with words, but I want you to know. I see you, all of you." Mara felt something inside her soften almost to the point of tears, not sad tears, but warm ones. "I never expected understanding," she whispered. "Here I feel like I can breathe." Evan stepped closer, slow and uncertain, stopping only when he was close enough to feel her presence but not touching her. "I don't want you to ever feel out of place again," he said. "I won't," she replied. "Not here, not with you." The storm outside rumbled, but inside the moment felt calm, steady and safe. Mara reached out first, gently placing her hand over Evan's bandaged one. He looked down at their hands, surprised but grateful. His fingers curled slightly, answering her gesture with quiet certainty. They stood like that for a long moment, simply feeling the warmth of each other's presence. When the storm calmed hours later, they stepped outside together. The air was cool, and the land shimmered under the soft evening light. The barn repairs would need attention again, but they would fix it, together. They walked across the field, side by side. A quiet future waited ahead of them, not rushed, not forced, but built on slow steps, shared work, and gentle trust. Evan turned to look at her, his voice soft but full of meaning. "We'll take things slow. Whatever we build here, we'll build it together." Mara nodded, her expression calm and sure. "Together." As they walked back to the house, their shoulders brushed. Not an accident this time, but something new and chosen. Something warm and hopeful. And in that simple touch, two lonely lives found a beginning that felt steady, honest, and quietly beautiful.